So I want a preference, and I'll probably put it in the title for this video too. This is not a review for the movie. The movie's not out yet. This is a review for the comic. Yeah. So, Hellboy the Crooked Man. I guess I'll talk a little bit about this follow-up book that goes with it, The Return of Elfie Kolb. So, as you guys know, there is a upcoming new Hellboy movie that is based off of this comic. And I had never read this story. Even as a Hellboy fan, I haven't read every single Hellboy comic. So, when this got reissued for the movie, I decided, you know what, I want to read this. I want to read this and give my thoughts on it. And obviously, I can't compare the movie to the comic yet, because the movie isn't out yet. So I wanted to do a review of the comic, and there's also a really nice audio, motion comic of this on YouTube. I think you can find it. I can't remember who does it. It's about 40 minutes long. It's really nice. It's actually, I watched that first, then I got the comic itself. So all in all, I was ready for this movie and see how it does. So let's talk about Hellboy the Crooked Man. Hellboy the Crooked Man is Hellboy in his younger years. I think this takes place at 1958. Basically, Hellboy is in the Appalachians and gets called in after a woman is cursed by a Appalachian witch. About that time, a young man named Tom Farrell has come back, and Hellboy accompanies him in order to discover what's going on in the Appalachians. And he discovers that there's this dark force of Appalachian witches led by the guy, the character Tom Farrell gave his soul to, the Crooked Man. That guy right there. So, I can see why a low-budget studio went with this book. I can see why they went with this story rather than do something big and bombastic as the other two studios did. And I think that's kind of smart, because this is a very low-budget book. Like, this could be seen as a low-budget movie. Hell, I could even see it if you gave it a good enough budget. You could give this as a fan film, honestly. It's basically like it basically lives up to the folk horror of it. And Hellboy himself isn't really the main focus. In fact, he's more of the ride-along character, and this is more Tom Farrell's story. He's basically the observer. He does fight monsters, and he does encounter, crazy shit, but at the same time, he's basically... I've said basically like 6 times, I just realized. He's more or less like the RIs going into this madness in the Appalachians. Again, folk horror has never been a thing I really liked, because folk horror to me just kind of feels like me. Like, folk horror is really hard to do. Like, it's really hard to get it scary. But here it's like Appalachian backwoods kind of witchery, and I like that. The Crooked Man himself doesn't really show up until, like, the 3rd book. He's more of a man in the shadows and more of, like, the overarching specter over Tom Farrell and Hellboy's head. The artwork by Richard Corbin, who has done a lot of horror books. He's especially known... Richard Corbin is especially known for doing a lot of, like, gross-out, like, very realistic, very brutal-looking stories. Like, he's known... Corbin has done a lot of horror books for Dark Horse and Image, and I think I remember he did stuff for Vertigo, too. But Corbin, if you want, like, gross, just imagery, as well as, like, just weird... Even, like, normal people's faces are off-putting. Like, everyone's face is very unique, and there's kind of a disturbing feel to it. I'm trying to find, like, a good piece of artwork that will perfectly encapsulate everything I've said about the character. I mean the artist, excuse me. So professional on this channel. Yeah, Corbin's art was... So it took me a moment, I was like, oh yeah, I've seen this guy. Yeah, like, it's stuff like that. He's really good at disturbing imagery. And while Mike Mignola did write the book, Corbin did do the artwork while Mignola did the storytelling. And I think that's for the best. I don't think, like, as much as I love Mike Mignola as a writer and as an artist, I feel like putting Corbin on this type of book was the smart idea. Again, we're going into folk horror, we're going into more like backwoods kind of characters. So to give them more of like a bizarre, almost inbred look, no offense, but that's, I think, was the idea for this story, was to get, like, pass it off for another artist. So hence why Mignola just did the writing and Corbin did the artwork. The comic itself, like I said, is a 3-part story. A lot of the thing I love about Hellboy stories is that they can be finished in like 2 or 3 parters at maximum in most cases. Like if you want to, like, a lot of Hellboy's best stories can be summed up as like weird adventures. Not to discredit any of the like bombastic, like big over the top, like world ending stuff, but that's the thing about Hellboy, is that you can get like these creepy stories and then get these big apocalypse stories from this character, and it doesn't feel out of touch. So while I can actually, honest to God, see why the studio, I can't remember the name of the studio, picked this one to do an adaptation of The Crooked Man. I can honestly see why they picked this story, because it's not that hard to do for like budget wise, and it's more horror than it is a action story. Again, I have no faith in that movie, but I'll give them credit for like picking the right, picking something that was in their budget. So I'll give credit where credit is due. They could have like really screwed the pooch and tried to do another a major story that is like the Plague of Frogs or something, and it would have looked so bad. So I think they picked the right idea of going with like a low budget kind of story with this. The sequel to this, The Return of Elfie Kolb, it's not great. I'm gonna be honest. It's a 2-part story that leaves more questions than answers, and doesn't feel like a really good sequel. And I do feel like after reading The Crooked Man, I'm just kind of like, I didn't need to return to this universe, and I feel like this was just set up for more stuff we're gonna have to pay off in like 5 years. That's one of the digs I have at Mignola, is that he will leave a plot thread hanging until he's like, oh shit, I forgot about that. Hang on, let me write that in real quick. Anyway, so all in all, I do recommend this. While The Return of Elfie Kolb is a kind of a lackluster sequel to the story, I do really like the 3-issue story. It's a very fluid. It's a nice fluid story. It flows perfectly. It's eerie. It has a great Southern Gothic kind of feel to it. So I give it I highly recommend it. And again, while I don't have any faith in in the upcoming movie, I think they went with the right idea. So I gotta give by picking this story. So I gotta give them some credit for like knowing to pick their battles. I gotta give them something. Anyway, so yeah, there you go. That's my review of Hellboy: The Crooked Man. You guys tell me in the comments below if you've read this story. Let me know in the comments below what you guys thought of it. Other than that, I hope you all enjoyed this. I'm Mr. Multiverse. I'll see you next time in the Multiverse.